High school is supposed to be a place of learning, friendships, and unforgettable memories. But what if some of those memories are nightmares that refuse to fade? Some students experience moments so terrifying that they stay with them forever. The stories you're about to hear are real, and they happen to real students. Would you dare stay after school alone? After hearing these stories, you might start questioning everything around you. Story 1. The Haunted High School Auditorium. It all started during my sophomore year at Ridgewood High School, a large old building with a rich history. The school had an auditorium that was famous for its impressive architecture and old-fashioned charm. However, the place was also known for being haunted. Most of us ignored the rumors, thinking it was overactive imaginations and ghost stories meant to scare freshmen. But what happened to me and my friends that fall changed our thinking forever? Our high school drama club was rehearsing for the annual fall play. The auditorium was the perfect setting for our play Macbeth. As the day of the performance approached, we started staying late into the evening to rehearse. One night, after everyone had left, a few of us decided to stay behind to rehearse our lines and practice some scenes. There were 5 of us: Mike, Jessica, Laura, David, and me. We were the main cast and took our roles seriously. The auditorium was dark, save for the stage lights, which cast strange shadows on the walls. The silence of the empty school was both calming and unsettling. As we rehearsed, strange things began to happen. At first, it was small things. Props would go missing, only to appear in strange places, and the sound system would crackle and hiss. We laughed it off, blaming our tired minds in the old building. Then things got worse. While rehearsing a particularly tense scene, the stage lights suddenly went out, plunging us into darkness. Jessica let out a terrified scream, and we scrambled to find our phones to use as flashlights. When the lights finally came back on, we saw something that sent a chill down our spines. Written on the stage floor in what looked like chalk were the words, "Get out of here." We all stared at the message, dumbfounded. David, trying to stay calm, said that it was probably a prank by some other drama club member. We decided to take a break and step outside to regain our composure. After a few minutes, we convinced ourselves that it was just a harmless prank and went back inside to continue practicing. As we continued practicing, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floor and rustle of the curtains made me tense. In a quiet moment, Laura whispered, "Did you hear that?" We all fell silent, straining our ears. From somewhere in the auditorium, we heard a faint sob. There was no mistaking it. Someone was softly crying. We followed the sound, cautiously moving through the rows of seats, but as we got closer, the sobbing stopped. We searched the auditorium, but no one was there. Feeling uneasy, we decided to call it a night. As we were packing up, we heard a loud crash from the stage. We turned around and saw the objects we had carefully assembled scattered on the floor, as if someone had violently knocked them over. A feeling of dread filled us. We left the auditorium and went to the school security office to report what had happened. The security guard on duty, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson, listened to our story with a knowing look. When we were done, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. We were stunned into silence. The next day, we shared our experience with the drama teacher, who decided to cancel the late-night rehearsal. The play went on as scheduled, but we made sure never to stay late again. To this day, I still can't explain what happened that night. The haunted auditorium is more than just a rumor. It's become a reminder that some stories have a way of lingering long after the final curtain falls. Story 2. The Music Room of Horror. When I was in high school, I was in band. Our band teacher, Mr. Nicholson, had a grading system where as long as you attended class and your weekly lessons, you got an A. At the end of one semester, I missed 2 lessons and my grade was a. I asked Mr. Nicholson if I could make up the lessons and he reluctantly agreed, allowing me to come in at lunchtime to practice in one of the storage rooms downstairs. I came in the next day, grabbed my saxophone, and headed to the basement of the music department. It was always a little creepy there because no one but the music teacher ever went down there, and the lights were dark. I found an empty storage room, set up my music stand, and started playing games on my phone instead of practicing. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. I instinctively flipped the light switch up and down, but nothing happened. I opened the door, darkness engulfed, using the screen of my phone as a light. I saw one of the doors near the end of the hallway open, and I heard something being dragged into that room, along with frantic breathing and animal-like groans. I saw a large plastic crate being pushed out of the room into the hallway. I turned off the screen of my phone and went back into my room, gently closing the door. I decided to hide, but the darkness and strange sounds made me wary. After a while, I tried to leave again, tiptoeing into the hallway with my phone to light. I heard something again and hid in the nearest room, closing the door behind me. Standing in complete darkness, I suddenly felt like there was someone else in the room. I picked up my phone and turned on the screen for half a second. That was enough to see someone standing in the corner, only 3 feet away. Pretending not to see them, I heard a hand tap my shoulder twice, then start squeezing. Panicking, I reached for the doorknob, struggling to find it in the dark, but I managed to pull the door open. The man in the room tried to push it shut, but I was already out. I ran up the stairs and into the main floor of the concert hall where the lights were still on. Story 3. Meeting new students. I was a new student at Southern Lehigh High School in Pennsylvania, starting my junior year. It was hard not knowing anyone, especially when everyone already had their own group of friends. Lunchtime was the worst. Juniors weren't allowed to leave for lunch, unlike seniors, so I had to eat in the cafeteria. The thought of sitting alone or awkwardly joining a random table was terrifying. When lunchtime finally arrived, I walked into the cafeteria with my tray of food, looking for a place to sit. Every table was taken, leaving me with no choice but to find the least intimidating spot. I saw a table in the corner with all stirring up my courage. I asked if I could sit with them. They looked at each other and one said, "Okay, sure." As I sat down, I realized they were identical twins. They introduced themselves as Antonio and Bruno. They seemed okay and we had a nice chat. They even invited me to hang out with them after school. I thought, why not? I needed to start somewhere to make friends. I got their phone numbers and after school, I went home to drop off my stuff. Soon after, I got a text from Bruno. He told me that he and his brother were planning on hanging out and asked me to meet them at a nearby cemetery around 9:00 that night. It was only a 10-minute walk from my house, and since it was Friday, I didn't have school the next day. Since I had nothing else to do, I agreed. When the time came, Bruno texted me back to confirm that I was still coming. I said yes and started walking in the dark towards the cemetery. As I walked, I thought more and more about my recent move and how I met 2 kids I barely knew at a cemetery. But I shrugged and kept going. I reached the small path beside the cemetery and texted Bruno asking where they were. He replied that they were in the woods by a small lake and sent me his location. Using the flashlight on my phone to guide me, I entered the woods, pushing branches out of the way. I called out to Bruno and Antonio as I sensed I was getting closer. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching me, slow and cautious. I called out, telling them they better not try to scare me. But no one answered. Realizing this was a bad idea, I turned and walked away. At that moment, the footsteps changed direction quickly. Before I could react, someone grabbed me by the neck, nails digging into my skin, choking me. I heard a familiar voice yell, "Get him! Get him!" I broke free of the stranglehold and sprinted back toward the road, hearing them follow me as far as the tree line. I ran all the way home, faster than I thought possible. I told my parents everything, and they considered calling the police but decided to report it to the school. And we took the nail marks on my neck and went to school the next day. With Bruno's message as proof, the twins were expelled. My parents made me block their numbers, and I didn't argue. About a week later, I woke up in the middle of the night feeling cold. The wind was blowing in my room. I saw that the window was wide open, which didn't make sense given the cold weather. I wondered if my mother had opened the door, but it didn't seem so. I closed the window and went to my parents' room to ask if they had. My mother, groggily awake, said no. Now worried, I told her that someone had opened my window. She shook my father awake, and he brushed it off, telling me to go back to sleep. When I returned to my room, I noticed that my door was now half closed instead of fully open like when I had left it. Pushing it open a little, I looked through the crack. I was terrified to see someone hiding behind the door. I yelled for my dad, and as he ran to me, the door slammed shut. My dad rushed in, turned on the lights, and we saw a leg disappear out the window. He ran down the stairs and out the front door to chase them, but came back empty-handed. Convinced that the twins wanted revenge, my dad called the police. They took my statement, but without evidence, there was nothing they could do. They advised us to lock the doors and consider installing cameras. I was convinced it was the twins, but after months of fear, nothing else happened. Looking back, I can't believe I agreed to meet those kids in the woods at night. I should have known better from the start. Story 4. The Scary Substitute. It was my freshman year of high school in 2007, and I was in my last period of gym class on one of the stormiest days of the year. We had a substitute gym teacher, an older man with gray hair, maybe 55 or 60. When he called the roll, he looked at me twice, which made me uncomfortable. I always knew I looked older and more mature than my age, but his eyes made me feel uneasy. He told us to join the volleyball team and disappeared into the hallway next to the locker room. The class passed, and it was time for us to change and go home. When I got to the locker room, my locker wouldn't open. I tried my code several times, but it wouldn't open. Frustrated, I went to find the attendant to ask for my code again. He told me to give him a few minutes so he could get a list of locker combinations. I waited outside the office, and when he returned with a book in his hand, he led me to the girls' locker room, which I didn't expect. The locker room was almost empty, except for one girl who had finished changing. The submissive went to my locker and tried the combination written on the paper. It didn't work. Every time he failed, he looked at me and smiled, and I forced myself to smile back to be polite. Then things got weird. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll figure it out." His hand slowly moved from my shoulder to my lower back. I pushed myself away, grabbed my bag. "It's okay, I'm going to miss the bus." He tried the combination again, and it worked. He smiled and walked away. Quickly changed and was about to leave when the room suddenly went dark. I pulled up my pants and fumbled to stuff everything into the locker. I put on my backpack and started walking toward the back exit. When I got to the end of the locker aisle, I looked to my right to make sure no one was there. I ran out the emergency exit, and he called after me saying, "Wait, it's not what it seems." I ran out into the rain and off campus, walking the rest of the way home. When I got home, soaked and shivering, I realized he must have changed my locker combination so that I was alone in the locker room. Just what he planned to do when the lights went out, I never wanted to imagine. I was too emotionally devastated and ashamed to tell anyone, not even my parents or friends. It was something I kept to myself all these years.